Hey guys, I know it seems weird to go from a video on elitism to one that talks about one of the most average metal bands to ever exist, but much like the Grave video, there's something I think that is to be said for bands that lose their way in terms of trying to contribute something to the metal pantheon, doing something that is kind of organic and then being told, hey, you fucked up, better put out something metal, and then them putting out the sellout record when they do their metal thing again. This band, Gorefest, I feel had a terminal case of identity crisis throughout their entire career. The Mind Lost record, the first record when it came out, people are going to discuss that as being a decent metal record because it is the most metal of their entire discography, but it does so in a very uninspired, uninteresting way. And the only times when it really stands out are when they kind of bring in elements of non-metal types of music, as shown in a track like Fetal Carnage, where it kind of sticks out in a Voivodian kind of way, where you're hearing these clashing notes that feel like they don't belong in the song, but at the same time, this gives it probably the only identity that the record had. And they kind of stumbled on to the best recipe of that with the False record, which I do love. But the reason that record succeeds is because of all of the non-metal stuff they bring in. A lot of the riffs in that record could sit comfortably on like a Soundgarden album, but they make it work. It's aggressive. It showcases a disgust for humanity, and you know it's decent, but it is dependent on strong tracks. It doesn't communicate an overall overarching theme. It's just a decent listen for a metal record. Then they put out Erase. We'll get back to Erase, but after Erase, they decided to put out like a Corrosion of Conformity sounding record. Totally didn't work. Really, really embarrassing to sit through. There's like one or two tracks that are actually good, but it's just an embarrassing listen. It shows the band as being incredibly vulnerable and lacking an identity whatsoever. If you hear this kind of record, it really will show you that this is a band full of adults that do not know who they are, which is the worst kind of people you want to surround yourself with. And they kind of reeled it back in the record after that, Chapter 13, which is kind of like more of a Motorhead type of vibe. It works a little more because it showcases that aggression. It's not quite as bluesy. I mean, if you're fucking Dutch, I don't want to hear some Southern fried American bullshit. Like, that's not who you are. And then they broke up, come back together, and put out some pretty painfully average death metal material that has a little bit of a punk flair. I mean, it's clear that they like punk. They fucking stole the Gorilla Biscuits logo. I fucking see what you guys did. Don't pretend. But still, that stuff, it doesn't warrant a reunion. It doesn't warrant more records. They had no mission statement as a band. And then if you're going to be coming back, you should have a narrative to tell, and they don't. They don't know who they are. They never did, and they coasted by on aesthetics. You know, the vocals are ferocious. They always were throughout the course of the discography, and at times their note choice is interesting, but that's not enough to designate a band identity. But it seemed to coalesce in the most organic way on this record, which is not their most metal record. It would probably be like the best White Zombie record if it was a White Zombie record. It's much like Grave with Hating Life. This is more of a it kind of has that Helmet groove to it, but there's an undercurrent of disgust for humanity that you don't get in like pop infused metal usually. It's a grimy record. It feels like it is their most deliberate sense of identity, even though there's not much to display here. It came out in, I think, 94, around the same time that all of the metal bands were kind of not knowing who they were. They got a taste of a little bit of success and were kind of throwing shit at the wall to see how much better they could be received. And this pissed off a lot of people. A lot of people did not like it, and rightfully so. It's not a metal record. I don't know what it is. It's a hard rock record with metal aesthetics, and On those terms, it kind of works. I'm not going to say it's a good record, but this to me feels like the most compact and understandable version of the band. And when I want to discuss records, sellout records or whatever, the only merit that I can find in them is that this is who I think they were trying to be for the entirety of the career. This is the most cohesive. I don't have proof for that, but all of the elements that they have in the band were streamlined in probably the most successful way here. The melodies that they use are the most they kind of conjure the most imagery without referring to the lyrics or anything. But there's really sardonic melodies. There's melodies that are really grimy, as I mentioned before, and that undercurrent of disgust is there. And when they do bring in the death metal aesthetics, like they'll bring in a really pummeling blast beat like once on one of the tracks, and they kind of did that on False. It only really shows up on the first track, but when they showcase that, because it's not overly abused as you would hear in like a modern tech death band, it stands out. It's like, holy fuck, now I'm hearing this fucking locomotive of sound coming at me, whereas it works because the entire record isn't built on that. And I'm not going to say you're going to find a transcendent experience here. Like I said, this is a superficially its merit is only superficial. It's an easy listen, but there's something about it that feels as confident as the band ever was. That confidence goes out the window with the next record, and all of the stuff after that is more pandering to the audience. There's a sound on this record that doesn't feel like it's equated with what their audiences wanted. And obviously the record was very not well received, but it feels like they put their heads together and came up with something comprehensive. As weak as it is, as little as it has to say, it still feels genuine, which is weird, because I listen to False the most. If I'm going to put this band on, I'm a metal guy, I like False, but I don't think False is a great record. I don't think this is a great record, but this to me seems more of who they were as people than False did. And I think when you peel back the layers and see that this came out pretty shortly after False, to have that much of a divorce between metal material and what this is shows me that they were never really in it in the first place. And going from Mind Loss to False to Erase, just the stripping back of metal layers shows me that they wanted to belong to something, didn't know how to do that, brought in this these alternative rock influences, kind of worked, and then here they showcase it the most and feel the most comfortable with who they are. And that I'll commend them for, because when you showcase who you are, that's the closest you'll get to giving me what might resemble art. And I know this is art in the most fucking basic, least positive way, but it's still more of an expression of themselves than I feel their previous two records were. And anything beyond that, not worth discussing. But I don't know, if you're really, really bored, have 40 minutes to spare, and want to put on something that, like I said, is not a great metal record, not a great hard rock record, but it's a timestamp for something that I feel is the band at their most organic, there's worse ways you could spend the time. Thanks.